When I was around 4 or 5, I was getting tucked in. There was this closet to my right. It was a sliding closet door and could be opened effortlessly. After my parents went to bed, I closed my eyes and attempted to start drifting. After around 5 minutes, I heard a rattling to my right and I jolted up. Now, I believed I was awake, and I would soon be proved wrong. I got up out of my sheets, stood up, went over to my closet, and when I did, the noise stopped. For a second, I thought, maybe I should go back to sleep. But I was determined to find out what this noise in my closet was. I never have been the there's a monster in my closet type of kid, but after this, I sure looked at my closet differently. I slowly began to open the closet door. Halfway through fully opening it, a loud screech screamed back and forth through my left and right ear, alternating quickly. I covered my ears, and then the ringing stopped. I looked back up and saw what I can only describe as two flickering red eyes floating there, slowly fading in and out of existence. Now, I'm pretty fucking thankful I already went to the restroom, because I would have pissed myself. After a second of sitting there, barely holding back tears thanks to adrenaline, and everything seeming to have stopped, I was shoved to my bed by unknown forces, and it began to wrap the blankets around me so tightly that I couldn't move. The blankets loosened and I began to throw them off, and when they were off, I had full intent to run to my parents' room. However, after getting the sheets off, I looked at my door and saw a shadow finger standing next to it, glowing red eyes fixated on me. Now, being a kid, I screamed. If I couldn't go to my parents, they were coming to me. But after I did, the shadow mimicked the scream in its creepy manner, and it slapped me full on my stomach. I woke up with a furious jolt. I thought it was just a nightmare all in my head. However, I noticed a burning sensation on my stomach and lifted up my shirt to see a bright red hand mark. No doubt it was. I screamed once more, and I heard my parents practically kick the door down and run to my room. They all saw it, the hand mark, and we still talk about it to this day, with no clue about who or what it was. I have slowly pieced more info about my old home's history and deaths together, and I would be happy to share the information. Just not now. So, some backstory. I've always been in touch with the supernatural, ever since I was a baby. My mother told me that I saw, heard, and knew things I shouldn't have. But when I got older, I started to repress this side of me, always trying to explain it using science. But sometimes, there are things not even science can explain. From when I was 13 to 17, I lived in a house out in the countryside in Sweden. We lived right by a lake. We had a dock and some old boats we found abandoned by a small beach near our home. During the summer, people would go boating and fishing. The Swedish name for this lake is Gravlangen, which roughly translates to long grave. It's rumoured by the locals that back in the day, they used to dump bodies into the lake. I've tried researching this, but found no written document of this ever happening, so it's hard to say if it is really true. There's a half island where we lived, a pretty big one covered in dense forest. This is where I and many others have experienced many strange events. The forest is divided into two parts, each with its own trail, that forks from the dirt parking lot. There is a field that divides the two parts. It was sort of like a shallow bog, and then there's this big dead tree that stands alone. There's the right side of the forest where many would walk along the trail to get to the cave, which was deep in the forest. My brother and I would often play and just do kid stuff on the right side of the forest. Both of us have witnessed strange things happening there. One of these instances is when we were deep in the forest around late autumn, exploring and fighting with sticks. Then all of a sudden, a man wearing a simple button-up shirt and brown suit pants just walked straight out of the bushes. Naturally, we were startled, but we greeted the man politely. Now, what I found strange was that he walked really stiff and had a blank facial expression. The clothes he was wearing just weren't weather appropriate since it was cold. When we greeted him, he just stood there looking at us, and without saying a word, he walked stiffly in a straight line into the thick tree line. Now, this incident is one of the more explainable and tame events that happened in that forest, but nothing compares to the horror I experienced on the left side of the forest. The left side of the forest was rarely visited by anyone. It was mountainous and dense with trees and other vegetation. Prior to this experience, I had never visited that part of the forest. This happened when I was 15. It was January of 2017, and it had recently snowed. It was a cold winter morning, and I was bored out of my mind. I decided to take a walk in the forest with the dog we had at the time. His name was Coda, and he was a Shar-Pei. Not the prettiest dog, and a bit of an arsehole, but I loved him nonetheless. I put the leash on him, and we set off towards the forest. We get to the fork, and usually we would walk on the right side, let him off his leash, and he'd run around, but sticking relatively close by as I walked. But that day, I wanted to explore the left side. It was like I had never known about the left side until that moment. Curiosity and a sense of adventure, I set off onto the trail leading up into that part of the forest. Walking along on the edge of the field until the path leads up into the forest itself. We walked along the path, climbing over a fallen tree and then downwards until we entered a clearing. I unleash Coda and he runs like a maniac, as he would often do. The first thing I noticed was 4 oaks in a near perfect square. I even took some pictures. Past the oaks, there were some young trees on the right-hand side of the far end of the clearing. If I remember correctly, it was birch. Then there were tire tracks that lead into the forest to the left. How a car could get there is a mystery to me, but I followed them since the trail had ended. As I walk into the tree line where the tires were heading, I noticed an archway formed by a fallen tree. As I walk along this road, there was a fallen hunting tower. It was covered in moss and seemed to have been there for a very long time. I kept going until I eventually ended up at the shoreline, and there I sat for a while reading a book as Coda was just doing dog stuff. After a while, I noticed it was getting late, and since it was winter, I had a bit over 1 hour of daylight left. Since it was only a 15-minute walk out of the forest, I was pretty relaxed and would make it home way before the sunset. So I called for Coda and we set off. This is when it happened. We walked the same way that we came, Coda walking ahead as he would. Getting closer to the clearing, Coda makes it there before me. As soon as he entered the clearing, he took a sharp right behind a tree and completely vanished. I was stunned. I got to the clearing, and as soon as I entered, it was like the world was put on mute. No wind, no birds, no nothing. Only the sound of my breathing. It had started to snow as well. I walked further into the clearing, and I was all of a sudden overwhelmed with the feeling of dread. Like my whole entire body was setting off alarms. I called out for my dog, and usually, not always, he comes right away. But there was no sign of him. He's not a gracious dog. You'd hear him if he was close, but he was gone. At this point, my body was in panic mode. I needed to leave. My brain was screaming for me to run, but I couldn't without Coda. Then I felt eyes all over me, coming from all around me. I felt like I was being watched by 1,000 eyes. I noticed it was getting dark far too quickly. Every second it was getting darker and darker. I was standing there, too afraid to move, crying and desperately calling out for my dog. I was there for 7 minutes, and every second felt like a lifetime. And then I heard a loud snap of a branch breaking. I looked in the direction it was coming from, and that's when I saw it, standing in the tree line far from where I was standing. It was only for a second, but that image is still burned into my mind to this day. It was huge, easily over 7 foot or 2 meters, and covered in the darkest black fur. It had the body of a moose, really long, thick front legs and shorter hind legs. The head was of a predatory animal I had never seen before. It looked like a photoshopped picture of a horse with a dog mouth. It was the most horrifying thing I have ever seen. The eyes are what I remember the most. It was like looking into the embers of a fire. There was so much hatred in those eyes. Even if I only saw it for a second, like a flash, I still saw its eyes, even when I closed my eyes. Like when you stare at a lamp or the sun. I thought this was the end. Time stood still, it felt like. Moments later, Coda comes from the tree line from my right. He walked right up to me and sat next to me. He never did that. I put the leash on, and we bolted out of there. It was really dark at that point, and I could barely see where I was going. The feeling of terror was also added with the feeling of, if I stop, I will die. I ran through the forest on the trail, practically jumping over the fallen tree, and ran down the hill. As soon as I got out of the forest, the feeling of terror stopped. I caught my breath in the dirt parking lot and noticed the sound of wind again. The sky was significantly lighter too. I felt safe. I went home and ate dinner, didn't say a word about what had just happened. A few months later, I asked my mother about the left side, if she ever went up there. My mother is a medium, so she feels bad energies and stuff like that. She told me that she stays away from the left side. She feels very dark energy coming from up there. That's when I knew what I experienced wasn't just a figment of my imagination. So, why am I writing this now? Well, my brother and I were talking about that place, recalling childhood memories. That's when he told me his scariest experience in that forest. He told me that he was on a walk on the right side, far in on the trail. He saw a deer leg placed half in a tall bush next to the trail. He said he remembers that it was fresh because blood was still dripping. He thought it was gross and kept on walking, thinking little of it. He walked to the cape and started walking back. That's when his body felt tense and that he felt like he was being watched. He picks up the pace until he got to where the deer leg was. That's when he noticed it was gone. It had only been 20 minutes since he was last there. That's when he knew he had to leave. Now, this could have been some fucked up hunter playing a prank, but he doesn't recall hearing a gunshot since the leg was fresh. It couldn't have been a wild animal since the half island isn't big enough for wolves and bears live up north. When he told me that, I knew that it had to be the entity. There's definitely something wrong with that place. I know as long as I live, I'm never stepping foot in those woods again. This was a few months back when I was still hanging out with a couple friends around the middle of May, and we were all old enough to be out by ourselves at almost midnight. We had seen Mortal Kombat in theatres, and it was around 11 p.m. by the time we got out. I was the designated driver for the night and needed to bring my friends home. I'll call them K and A. A lived a couple miles out of town in a rural area, so I decided to drive them home first, then drop K off at their place. Everything goes well on the ride there. We're talking about the movie and listening to music. We drop A off at their house, then start making our way back. While rounding a corner to turn on the main road, I got this awful feeling in the pit of my stomach. I would have written it off as anything else like sleep deprivation or hunger, since I hadn't eaten anything but a small popcorn at the movies. But Kay mentioned they got the same feeling around the same time I did. A few seconds later, A loud thump comes from underneath my car. We both heard it too. At first, I thought I had hit a rock or an animal, but then the thumps kept happening like someone was banging their fist on the other side of the car. That's when I became terrified. The feeling only got worse to the point I was shaking and could barely keep my hand steady. We were both freaking out by this point. I sped up in hopes to get rid of whatever was with us. I wasn't going to risk pulling over and checking for whatever was there. Kay decides that instead of immediately dropping them off, I bring them with me, call my grandmother who I was living with at the time, and inform her of what was going on. They dial the number for me, and I explain the situation as best I can. My grandmother is standing on the porch waiting for me, looking quite disgruntled by the time I arrive, around 11:45. I'm scared to get out of my car, but I came to the conclusion I have to brave it and face the situation, or else I was going to remain in the seats for the rest of the night. I grab my car's door handle and go to open it, but something tells me to look out the window first. I do. That's when I see it. Some sort of creature was standing just a couple yards away in the field next to my house, staring at me. It was misshapen, and it looked almost humanoid, but I couldn't make out its features due to how dark it was. I knew for a fact it wasn't friendly, though. I blinked, and it was gone. My shaking got worse, and I looked over at Kay, who had also seen it and was looking at me in fear. Apparently, my grandmother hadn't seen anything and chalked the noise up to my charger block banging on my car while I was driving, since it had gotten caught in the door earlier. Needless to say, I wasn't able to sleep much that night. My friends and I all stayed up on Snapchat with each other in the group chat, talking about what happened. And A had explained they had seen similar things out their bedroom window. I swear to this day, something had latched itself underneath my car and followed me home. I never saw the creature or anything like it again, but I'm more cautious when driving on roads at night. When I was younger, I used to short out light bulbs just by touching the switch. Lights would flicker when I came into the room, and objects tend to disappear and reappear around me. As crazy as that sounds, that's literally my life. Anyway, I've come to accept the fact that I may be, as some call it, sensitive. But there is a story in my life that I still, to this day, can't quite figure out what the hell happened. This all went down when I went on a trip to Washington, D.C. It was kind of a school outing, and we were only going to be there for a day. Things were going just about how you'd expect DC in January, cold as hell. Until about lunchtime, when we decided to go to a restaurant not too far from where my friends and I were supposed to meet up with our group. So, to set the scene, we're eating at a restaurant that has a window directly facing the street. The whole thing is pretty open concept, so you can see everyone in the restaurant, no matter where you are. There's also a bar set right up against the window facing the street, and behind it is a single-use restroom that you have to use a code to enter. Emphasis on that part. To the direct left, if you're facing the bathroom, is the entrance to what I'm sure was the kitchen. Anyway, my friends and I, we get our food, and we decide to sit at the bar because the restaurant's pretty crowded. It was a really cold day, so no surprise there. So we're talking and laughing, when suddenly I get the urge to pee. Now I should preface this by saying I have extreme social anxiety, and it really stresses me out to have to ask strangers for anything, i.e. the code of the bathroom. So I like to observe someone else do it before me so I know it's okay. So I ask my friend if she'll go get the code, and she says to wait a minute, but then got distracted and didn't. At this point, I really have to go, and I'm just about to summon all my courage to go up to the counter and ask, when I see a woman approach from my right. As I'm now turned around on my chair and looking in the direction of the restroom, I see her go to the door of the bathroom and put in the code to enter, Mind you, it's a single-use restroom, so I'm going to have to wait for her to finish before I can use it. No problem, I've waited this long. What are a few more minutes? So I'm waiting and waiting and waiting, and still, this woman hasn't come out. I mean, I'm not the one to judge, so I try to be chill about it. That is, until another person, a man this time, approaches from my right, the main area, and puts in the code and goes in. I think this is weird, but again, I'm not one to judge, so I lean over to my friend and joke, "Do you think they're in there together?" She laughed and suggested that maybe it wasn't a single use stall, and there was a multiple bathroom type situation. At this point, totally plausible, so I guess I'm waiting on two people now. Anyway, I'm still looking at the bathroom because, I have to go, and I want these people to hurry up. Finally, the man comes out, but the woman never did. I know this because even though I was talking to my friend, my attention was directed to the bathroom, and as I said before, you can see everything in the restaurant. So there's no way she could have left without me seeing her. Also, totally plausible that they were trying to keep it on the DL. So I wait for a few more minutes and continue talking with my friend. My gaze, however, is forward, looking at the bathroom. My friend can also confirm she saw no one leave because even though she's kind of facing the street, she'd still be able to see the door open or close, not only from her peripheral vision, but also the window. Now here's where things get even stranger. As I'm about to get up once again, another man goes to the bathroom and puts in the code. Woman still hasn't come out, by the way. So he goes in and I'm waiting again. Did I mention I have anxiety in social situations? For him to come out. This next part, you can believe me or not, but I know what I saw. I'm an artist. I know what people's faces look like. And I know that this last man looked like who went into the restroom. However, an entirely different man comes out who looks nothing like the guy who went into the bathroom. Mind you, I've been looking at this door this entire time, and even with people coming in and out of the kitchen, you still know when it's the bathroom door and not the kitchen door. Okay, and the strangest part of all, when I finally get into the bathroom, it is a single stall. No windows, no doors, nada. Just one way in and one way out. Added to this, it's located pretty much dead center in the building's layout. I've 23 female, always had creepy paranormal experiences. But when I'm with my sister, who's 25, the dial goes up to 10 on the creep factor. So anyway, a couple of months back, my sister and I had to drive up to Colorado on a family emergency. Specifically, we were driving to Dillon, Colorado. The drive up was pretty normal and nothing weird started to happen until we got right outside of Leadville. That's when things took a turn for the decidedly strange. You can believe me or not about what I'm about to say, but even though it was late at night, I know I'm not crazy and my sister saw all of this too. So we're driving and it's pitch black outside. There's very little street lamps, so the only things we can see are illuminated by headlights. My sister is driving and I'm in the passenger seat. At this point in the drive, we had only a few more hours until Dillon, and we were determined to stick it out no matter what, despite the fact that we'd been driving for nearly 12 hours at this point. Looking back, I kind of wished we'd had some common sense and found a hotel. I'd never driven on this road at this time of night. It was about 9. My sister has the radio going. I'm staring out the window, trying to stay awake, when all of a sudden my sister slammed on her brakes. Now, for context, my sister is a cabbie. There's not a whole hell of a lot that would make her slam on the brakes like that. So when she did, I was automatically on full alert, wondering what the hell just happened. Before I can even ask her what made her slam on the brakes, she's telling me to look up. No shit, standing in the middle of the opposite lane on the deserted 2-lane road is a big as fuck coyote. Bigger than any coyote I've ever seen. Not that unusual, except it was just staring at us. Not the car, at us. It was making full on dead ass eye contact with us. Obviously creeped out, I told my sister to just floor it because I didn't like the eerie, almost intelligent way that it had been looking at us. As we passed it, I forced my eyes forward so I wouldn't have to look at it. We kept driving, a little shook up, but laughing it off. After all, we're both from the southwest, and there's no way a lone coyote is going to spook us that bad. A little bit further down the road, I'm calmed down again and back to staring out the window. Maybe 5 more minutes pass before I hear my sister ask me, "Did you see that?" Thinking she's messing with me, I'm like, "No, see what?" As I turn to look at her, I can see she's spooked. Believe me, it takes a lot to spook her, so I was immediately concerned. She sees that I have no clue what she's talking about and she says, "Dude, there was a hand. It just came up out of the backseat and touched the dash." Now I'm even more creeped out. I try to make a joke out of it, saying how it's late and the whole thing with the coyote, but she's insistent on what she saw, so I ask her to replicate it. She gestures to the back seat and say, "I saw a hand come up and touch the dash like this." At this, she makes a fist and taps it against the dash. I shake my head, tell her I didn't see anything, that we should just keep going because I'm sure as hell not turning back now. But oh man, that was not the end of it. Not even 10 minutes later, we're still driving on this dark, windy mountain road. I'm looking forward, fully awake now and doing my best to take my mind off the situation. When I happen to glance out the driver's side of the front windshield, again, on the opposite side of the road, I see a woman standing on the edge of the road. She's all alone and just standing there in a torn white dress and barefoot. Obviously thinking that this girl needs help, I open my mouth to ask my sister to stop. Before I can get the words out, we're already around the next bend, and as I look in the rearview mirror to check if she's still there, the girl is just gone. Vanished. Poof. I'm really freaking at this point, and I just want to get to our hotel. Thankfully, a few minutes later, we were in Leadville itself, which, to be honest, around 10 or 11 at night was just as creepy, if not more. I dreaded when we got to the outskirts of town and had to go back into that lonely mountain highway. Mind you, we're still alone. We haven't seen another car in over an hour, which makes this next part even creepier somehow. So, a few miles on the other side of Leadville, I feel my sister grab my arm. Again, she asks that dreaded question, "Did you see that?" I say no, obviously. I'm keeping my eyes on my side of the vehicle and have no idea what she's talking about. So she says, and honestly after what happened after this, I completely believe her, that she saw breath on the outside of the windshield. Not the inside, the outside. Like someone outside the vehicle had breathed on the glass. I'm really glad that I didn't see that, because I would have turned the car around. But at this point, we're both like, fuck it, we're almost there, and we can hold out until Dylan. So, like dumb idiots in a horror movie, we kept driving. I don't know distance-wise how far away this is from Leadville, but we came up to a weird parking lot area at a bend in the road. I think it was a hotel or something. I'm not too familiar with the area, but it was weird seeing a parking lot and actual lights in the middle of Buckfuck End, Colorado. I'm saying this to tell you that as we approached this place, we saw oncoming headlights. Now, mind you, this was the first car we'd seen in a long time. But if there was this weird lit up building out there and Leadville only a few miles behind us, it wouldn't be that strange to see a car heading the other direction. Except, the car didn't go in the direction we thought. No, we both saw the lights of this car and we both saw it drive parallel to the road and disappear. Now, we're for sure thinking we're hallucinating and making jokes about aliens, saying how that was a flying saucer, and we could tally that to the list of weird things we'd seen. With not much options left but to drive, we keep going. But man, that's when things started getting really bad. The longer we're driving, the more freaked my sister looks. At one point, she tells me that the lane lines are disappearing, as in, she can't tell the difference between one lane line and another on a two-lane mountain road. You can blame this on fatigue, but my sister drives a cab for a living. She wakes up at 2 a.m. to go to work most days. There's no freaking way, no matter how tired she is, that she's hallucinating the lane lines not being there. I can see them just fine, but she swears up and down that she can't see lanes on either side. I think it was only her experience as a cab driver that saved our asses. Now, this next part is going to sound insane, and I don't blame anyone for not believing me. I wouldn't believe me if I didn't experience it myself. So, we've got the lane lines disappearing, cars disappearing off the road, weird shit breathing on the windshield, and the icing on this cake is that now it feels like the car is doing a free fall down the mountain. No, not like we're out of control. Like there's an invisible force pushing us from behind and trying to make us go down the mountain faster. My sister is riding the brakes like hell. And I'm trying to figure out why it feels like we're in free fall. And we're on a less than 20-degree slope. It makes no sense. As I'm thinking this, I hear my sister ask me, "Hey, is it windy outside?" I shake my head. Check my phone and I'm like, there's no wind outside at all. In the car, you would have been able to hear the wind and feel it pushing on all sides, not just the back. Wind makes a very distinctive noise, and so I know that there wasn't any wind that night. That doesn't explain, however, why when my sister told me to look at the trees on either side of the road, they were swaying, bending back and forth like there's a storm outside. But there's no storm, there's no wind, no clouds, nothing. Nothing that could explain why these trees are moving like this. I'm really freaked out now, and I start to pray. I'm religious to a point, and I'm not ashamed to say that I pray when I get scared like this. And I was terrified. Because underneath all of this crazy, this strange, eerie feeling was creeping up on me. It felt like there was something in the woods watching us. The trees felt almost alive, and there was just a darkness. I don't know else to explain it. It was just evil. It felt evil and wrong, and I just didn't want to be there. I started praying harder and told my sister to drive as fast as she could away from that place, which, to be honest, with everything going on, wasn't that fast. For some reason, I just kept repeating there's something bad here, something bad happened here, I don't like it. Saying that over and over again. So of course, my sister asks, what do I mean, and why do I keep saying that? Now, I'm not sure if I'm a medium, but I would consider myself sensitive. I can pick up on the energy of spirits and places. So, like a dumbass, I open myself up to whatever the fuck this thing is. I can hear my sister asking me what happened. And the word that came out of my mouth, in an inhuman guttural growl, was, "Murder." That voice was not my voice. That thing was not human. As soon as that word left my mouth, I burst into tears. I was so scared. I clutched my Mary medallion and I held my sister's hand. I made her pray the prayer of St. Michael with me. And when we were praying, it was almost like she couldn't get the words out. Like, I don't know, something was trying to stop her from praying. I haven't been that scared of something paranormal in a very long time, and I never, ever want to drive that stretch of road at night ever again. Could we have been hallucinating? Sure, but I don't know, this next part somehow creeps me out even more. So, we're at the hotel now and we're in our room, both talking about how crazy that all was. When my sister says, "You didn't see it, did you?" And of course, I'm like, "See what?" She tells me and I believe her because she was dead serious. My sister can't lie if her life depended upon it because she just starts laughing. It's her tell. That's how I knew she at least believed what she saw. She told me that she saw a skeletal figure, like a human figure in the woods. It was all bone with like rotten flesh hanging off it. even though its body was human. She said that it had the head of a deer and like glowing red eyes. She looked so scared, I don't know how I couldn't have believed her. According to my sister, she saw this thing tailing the car the moment we both noticed the trees moving. So about halfway or a third of the way down. Needless to say, I was pretty glad that she told me that after we got to the hotel. Now, one last thing before I wrap this up. So, my stepmom is from the Denver area and just so happened to have family in Dillon. I casually asked her if she'd ever experienced anything weird on that road, and I didn't even have to tell her which one for her to know, which road I was talking about. She said when she was a kid, it used to freak the hell out of her. She can remember falling asleep in the car, and then whenever they got to that stretch of road, automatically waking up because she was too scared to sleep. And the thing about the car driving parallel to the road, well, my stepmom said, and I haven't confirmed this, so take this with a grain of salt, that the roads used to be built differently back in the day. That they would have run parallel to the mountain and not alongside it. She also told me a story of when she was a teenager, about how there was a time she and her dad were driving on the road at night. She's in the passenger seat for context. She remembers looking up and seeing oncoming headlights in their lane, screaming and then throwing her hands up out of reflex. Her dad swerves, almost crashes, and then asks her what's wrong. My stepmom, confused, asks him if he saw that car just now, and he says no, of course. To be honest, that just confirmed it for me. Oh, and the whole thing about that weird voice. My sister said that when I spoke in that tone, it was about 2 octaves deeper than my natural voice, completely flat, and absolutely not human. Me and my sister both agree that whatever that entity was that she saw was absolutely trying to harm, if not kill us. We both think that it was screwing with her about the lane lines and trying to push us off the mountain. For what purpose? I still don't know, but I honestly don't think I want to. We also agreed that all the freaky shit we saw before was something trying to warn us. The primary reason? That hand with a fist in sign language can mean stop. I think it's possible those other entities were trying to tell us to turn around. Too bad we didn't listen, lol. But anyway, that's my story of a possible encounter with a Wendigo and other things that go bump in the night. I never have and never will again drive that road between Leadville and Dillon at night, or any other time. So I'm just curious, has anyone else had an experience like this there? Or an experience like this in general?